Reaching all the way back to 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition. Here is your host of Fate Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine, and I am so glad that you are here. You know, we have a wonderful guest scheduled for you tonight, Paige, and we are trying to get in touch with her. There seems to be some sort of a little glitch there, but she will be in as soon as she can, I'm sure. But in the interim, you know, I'm very excited because I have had a fantastic couple of weeks. And one of the adventures that I had involved a paranormal investigation in Pensacola, Florida. And it was in the Old Town, which is interesting anyway. It was a private residential of 4 homes on what would have been one lot back in the day. It's down by the water, which historically, the poor people lived on the water. Isn't that funny? Because people would give and do give a whole lot now to be down there. But back in the day, the wealthy built up on the ridges, up on the inland, because they didn't want their property damaged. Of course, nobody does. But the poor working people lived down on the water's edge. And that's where these houses are. What occurred was that a friend had purchased one of the homes. His dog, who I know, refused eventually to go into it. And this was very upsetting. The house in the middle was getting activity. The next house was getting intense activity, affecting another dog, as well as the woman of the house. And the last house has activity, but the guy kind of liked it. Okay, so that one stayed. But I reached out because while I am a really good paranormal investigator, I felt like there might be a need for a psychic to do a little bit better communication. So we went there. And I asked if Mark Volz, who is a brilliant metaphysician, would join me. And my research partner and friend and co-investigator, Lori Dorsey, who is out of Ohio, flew down to participate. And I'm telling you, we investigated Scotland together. The girl is great. She is a brilliant researcher. So we're going through, we have different equipment. Lori and I went the first night just to get a feel for the building. And the energy was off the chain. The EMF was pegging. It was as if Lori was in the front bedroom and she was like, somebody is walking up behind me. I don't know who that is. The one time she didn't bring her SLS, but it's so hard to get through the airport. But we had thermal imagery. We had other things going on. It was just really interesting. So the following night, the homeowner, my friend, drove over, and this house was under renovation. So it was interesting. He came expecting to see a general, normal, can you knock, kind of ghost hunting experience. And with Mark there, he got a lot more than that, because it's very odd when you work with someone who has those abilities. I know a lot of y'all have, but to see it in play, if you're not accustomed to that or never have, is unbelievable, because you have someone who is like, okay, this guy's a putz, doesn't like women, doesn't have any respect. He is violent. He is, other things too, but I'll be glad to channel him if you want to get information, because I'm just trying to get documentation. I'm expecting to do a normal paranormal investigation too. And then this is presented. I didn't know what I thought. I've never worked with a channel before. And let me tell you, it was bizarre, because in the course of this, There was no information given to Mark. Very little had been given to me other than the activity. I had not gone and done a property search on this house because I did not want to dive into the weeds and get too much information. But as it worked out, it was totally bizarre because Mark went into opening the communication with the spirit. And it was a specific directed conversation. I'm sure you could have talked to anyone that was there, but he was focused. And I was the person who was supposed to be asking questions. If there were questions that someone else had, they could give them to me and I could ask them. Apparently, it's very focused, as I said. And the homeowner was just kind of watching. Lori was sitting to my right watching. There was another friend of the homeowner there. And it got to be a little nuts. I'm just, the homeowner and his friend had to get back over to Alabama. So they left and we're still there going. And we're getting in that. Mark already had a name before we started, but I actually saw someone's physical structure of their face alter. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. I couldn't video it because I had a fully charged, fantastic little full spectrum video recorder there with me. Turned it on, it turned off. Turned it on, it went for about 2 seconds, and the switch flipped. And I was like, well, okay, we're going to audio record this. And it was the strangest thing ever. And as we're getting more into the depth of the conversation, we had a name. We had a state where he was from. We had why he was there. And we also had the death experience described in detail to us. The individual had come from Wisconsin. He got in trouble there. He ran away. He came south. He had been in the area and knew that the structure that had previously been on this property was what he was familiar with. He talked about how he did not care for the photo that the image an artist had done of him that was hanging in the post office because it made him look black, and he wasn't black. He was just very tan. His hair was black. When I would get to questions that were a little bit too personal or that would touch on why he had been on the post office wall, I got, that's none of your business. And we would move along. It didn't stop, but I was, shut down on that line of questioning. And it was really something that was quite bizarre. I even got a death, the year of the death. And he shared the experience of his death. And because I was like, well, why are you here? Why is this your place? And he was like, well, this is a dump. I don't like this place, but this is where I came to see my friends who lived here after, when my body didn't get back up. And I was like, oh, well, who were your friends? He was like, well, it's just the whores that lived here. I was like, oh my gosh. So it was somebody that was speaking, his mannerisms, his speech, the language was very, very much of his time. His lack of manners, maybe, were indicative of couldn't be bothered. You're just a woman kind of a thing. Not ugly, but, it came out that the reason that the dogs were afraid of him were because he hated dogs. He had been trying to get away from a jail, from a situation, whatever, and had dogs sicked on him. And they tore him up. He actually said that he had been sewn back together with horsehair. I didn't know that was a thing. Turns out it is. But, yeah, and so here these poor dogs are in these two separate houses. Well, Bo just visits, but the other dog lives in that other house full time. They were both terrified. And that was the main reason that we were called, was because the dogs were being affected. The humans were, we can handle this. I don't think they would have been able to for long, but their animals were being affected. And so we went to the first house, and when the cleansing and protection were put over it, the dog who had been laying on the bed, I really thought she was dying. I thought she was unhealthy, and this was something that was going on, and et cetera, et cetera. And I had been concerned for her. But this dog, we're all in the kitchen talking. Mark's telling them how to maintain the protection and how to, cleanse with vinegar, that type of thing. Very old school, because he's very old school. But the dog had gotten off the guest bed that had been put up in the living room. There was someone staying there who had had surgery and was kind of vulnerable. They weren't there at the time. But the dog got up, came in, walked across, coming through the other room into the kitchen. And the area that had been so full of energy was, I felt it when I walked across it. Mark said this was the energy center of this house where this spirit was located. The dog just walked over to it and just stood there, and dogs can smile. She was. I was like, I can't believe this is the same dog. This is bizarre. So he cleansed that home, taught them how to maintain and protect it, and all was well in their world. Then we went to the other house and did our thing there. And it was really the most extraordinary thing, because once that home was cleared as well, it was just, the room was cooler. The room was easier to breathe in. Because really, these are just shotgun houses, right? These are old school, very small houses. And this entity had been friends with the people who lived there. The reason that he came there was because he was in a brawl at a bar a few streets up and stabbed a guy and took off to get away, and the guy shot him. And I was just kind of like, really? So meanwhile, Mark is this person we're talking to and has given permission. This is, as I said, it's my first time working with the channeling session. So I'm trying very hard to be professional, not mind blown, not freaked out. And I'm totally freaked out because my friend does not even look like my friend. And I have to tell you, it was the most bizarre experience ever. And I was getting answers when I asked, where were you shot? Mark tapped his forehead. So I'm thinking, okay, that's Mark thinking. And I waited a moment and I was like, where were you shot? Where did that man shoot you? And he tapped his forehead again. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. That's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. I'm so sorry you were shot in your head. And he said, well, yeah. He said, and I went down, but I didn't get back up again. So I didn't know what to do. So I ran. And this was the only place I knew to come. It was close. These people knew me. And it was my safe place, but they didn't recognize me. So we are going to go and take a break. And thank you so much for listening, because this is going to be such a fun show. I hope you enjoyed our paranormal experience in Pensacola. There's more, but I'll save it for later.
Hobbs, and I'm here to tell you about something I really think you're going to like. The UNX Network is a part of a larger group called UNX Media, and one of the things we offer is the quarterly UNX magazine, which is available both in print and digital formats. This amazing magazine covers all aspects of the unexplained and makes for a great coffee table periodical that is certain to spark enlightening conversations in your living rooms. We invite you to check out the latest digital issue for free. Just go to unxnetwork.com/membership and fill out your free membership with your name and email and become a new free member. The new summer issue is now available, and the theme is Time Anomalies, which includes a feature article written by our managing editor, Lee Spiegel. Just go to unxnetwork.com/memberships. That's unxnetwork.com/memberships and get your free e-copy of the UNX magazine today.
Medical Mary has the highest quality CBD products to enhance your health and wellness goals. Our cutting-edge formulas are not only made with the best ingredients, but also are curated to target specific needs for the body. Use CBD for energy, weight management, pain and stress relief, beauty, sleep quality, pets, and more. Our motto is people helping people. Start your journey into improved health and happiness with Medical Mary CBD. Available at medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. That's medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. Or visit my website, margiek.com, for a link. I use Medical Mary and I love it, and it works. I sleep better and feel better thanks to Medical Mary CBD. Visit margiek.com for more information.
I spent a lot of time in the garage, but even more time in the rain and mud. In 95, I helped tow your moving trailer. And in 09, it was sparks from me, your chains, dragging behind your truck that accidentally started a wildfire.
Spark a change, not a wildfire. Visit SmokeyBear.com, brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the UNXNetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Jimmy Church, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Christina Gomez. Visit the UNXNetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time. It's new. It's the X.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I have to tell you that if you want to know more about the experience that I shared in our first segment, message me. I'll tell you, it was cool. But even cooler is that I have Katie Paige here joining me, and she is one of the most interesting women I've met in quite some time. She is the author of Letters of Love and Light, 4 Decades of Encounters, Experiencers, and Sightings shared with ufologist Leon Sprinkle. She is a lifelong experiencer and researcher. She is currently the state director for the Colorado MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. She is really awesome. I've enjoyed listening to some of her lectures. I've enjoyed just, being a fly on the wall in some conversations, and I have enjoyed having the chance to talk to her myself. She is so much fun. Katie, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Kat, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be part of the show tonight.
Well, I'm excited too. I did not realize. I know that you have been to a place that's called the Meadow, which is documented in the Meadow Project, and we're going to talk about that. I did not realize that where you grew up was a ranch in Colorado that had astounding activity, and that's where you developed your interest and your expertise in ufology.
Yeah,
and strangeness.
Yeah, I mean, and it's even generational. Sometimes, these experiences can be generational within families. So, growing up as a young girl, I was born in Illinois, and around Thanksgiving, Christmas time, you have those repeated family stories that kind of generation to generation. And my grandfather, who was in the Navy, had a sighting investigated by J. Allen Hynek in the early 60s of an oblong shape over Lake Como in Wisconsin. And then going back from Illinois to Wisconsin, we had a couple more sightings of the same oblong shaped craft. So, kind of from early on, it was nothing we talked about often, but it's just sort of, you were aware of the possibility that this phenomenon existed. And then fast forward, to the mid 70s, where Linda Moulton Howe, she got her start out in Colorado as an investigative journalist, researching this rash of cattle mutilations that were occurring at the time from 1975 to roughly 1978. I mean, these things were occurring almost daily, of just not only cow, but horse, sheep, sometimes dog. And
you don't hear about that as a rule. You always hear the cattle mutilations, but very rarely do the others make the news or conversation.
True. Yeah, that is so true. And we all heard, a lot of us that are in the field obviously know of Snippy the horse out in Alamosa back in the day, where kind of this phenomenon really grabbed hold. Yeah, you don't really hear about, the sheep. And I actually was just talking to Charles out of the United Kingdom, the UK, and they have just rashes of mutilations with their herds of sheep and stuff. So, it's still going on to this day. It's still going on. A lot of these ranchers and farmers, they don't like to report it anymore. It's been happening for decades. But back during these days, when I was a young girl, these were occurring almost daily. And I was never aware that this phenomenon was ever reported or researched by anybody. My sister and I and my family just had memories of all these high strangeness occurrences happening on the ranch property. And it wasn't until after I joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. I learned about MUFON on a documentary, joined in 2012, came right in as a field investigator. And then in 2013, I purchased a book, Hunt for the Skinwalker by Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, and started reading in their chapter, Other Hotspots, about a ranch in Colorado. And I just knew, because of the strange dynamic of the family, this has to be the ranch, because the location was never known to anybody. It was known as the Clearview Ranch or the Rocky Mountain Ranch, but the location was unknown. And that was the first time I knew that anybody had known about it or that it was ever investigated. And in that book, it mentioned that Dr. Leo Sprinkle, PhD. Now, Dr. Leo Sprinkle, unfortunately, we lost him a couple years ago. And he was a pioneer in the field. He was a psychologist out of Laramie, Wyoming, and really focused in on hypnosis, the abduction experiencer phenomenon, as well as past life regressions. And he was a PhD. There were two other PhDs out there investigating the ranch, Peter Van Arsdale and John Durr. But since Dr. Leo was so close there in Laramie, I quickly wrote him a letter, and he confirmed that, yes, this was the property. And I was quickly, that weekend I drove out there and got all the original documents and things from the APRO report, which is the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization back in the day. And it's been over a 10-year journey trying to uncover what was going on at that ranch property ever since.
Now, you had personal experiences at that ranch, didn't you?
Yes, we did. Now, my mother, we didn't live there full time. My mother was dating the gentleman that owned the ranch property. She dated him for several years. And they both worked for United Airlines. My mom was a computer operator. So from where we lived to where the ranch property was about an hour commute. And so the two younger boys lived with us during the week. And on the weekends, we would drive them back and forth to the ranch property. So like on the weekends, I'm 9 years old during these years, 9, 10, 11 years old. And we'd hear the adults kind of, police were called, things were happening. But we were told by the adults in our lives and by the strange disembodied electrical voice, which was the most terrifying night on the ranch property. And I can get into that in a minute, never to talk about what was happening out there. When I got the documents from Dr. Sprinkle, I learned very quickly that not only was NORAD in the Air Force, Camp Carson, but they had like soldiers in that on the ranch property. We know, there was this phenomenon of these unmarked helicopters being sighted out there. And I dug a lot of newspaper articles from back in the day. And some of the reports of these unmarked helicopters, they're chasing and menacing, young people. And I'm like, why would they do that? So there was all sorts of mysterious things going on. So my question that I've always had was, how much of this was Black access military projects? How much of this was actual unexplained phenomenon, UFOs, aliens, that kind of thing? Because it wasn't until just recently when the second book came out, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, when they started talking about this hitchhiker phenomenon, which is very, very real. But for me personally, I kind of compartmentalized all these different things that were occurring back in the day. When I was young, from at my home, which was an hour away from the ranch, I was experiencing these tall shadow beings in my room, paranormal activity, but I didn't connect it to the ranch until just recently. It
would have been, you were a kid. It would have been very hard to understand that would be parallel activity, separate locations. That's just so. How frightened were you?
Extremely frightened. All of us are afraid of things we don't understand. And when you have these tall, and when you're young, they're even taller than what they probably were. I would guess them to be around maybe 6 feet, 6.5 feet, somewhere in there. They were tall. Just these black shadowy things. They'd be either on the side of the bed, inside the doorway. Always slept with big sister, never slept alone.
I can understand that.
Connected to what was happening on the ranch. But yeah, it's been interesting. One of the first things reported on the ranch property when they first purchased it were these loud bangs and humming sounds. And sometimes those humming sounds would get so loud you couldn't hear yourself speak over it. So what's interesting is just recently I filmed with History Channel's Beyond Skinwalker. It's the third episode, is called the Rocky Mountain Ranch episode. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But what was fascinating is the people that own the property now purchased it from like my mom's boyfriend's family, right? So it went from us to them. So they've been there for quite some time. And what really shocked everybody, when they first interviewed them, they're like, have you heard these humming sounds? And they're like, no, we've been here over 30 years. We haven't heard that. So there we are with the film crew out there. And I could say the film crew and that whole experience, because they filmed for a whole week.
Right.
It was on the up and up. They were very professional. They never scripted anything. They didn't, not one time did they repeat this line or do this or do that. It was just all very, we don't want you to meet the new owners until the cameras are rolling. It was very up and up. And so we're sharing our stories and they're like, no, we haven't heard the hum. Well, I was at the bar filming in Elbert talking with the two main guys on the show, Andy and Paul, and they're interviewing the family on the ranch at the cistern where, close where we hear these, where the noise was the loudest, the bangs and everything underground. And what happens for over 45 minutes, that hum starts up.
Get out of town. I have not seen that episode yet because traveling, working, but that is so astounding.
Yeah, I'm like, what? And what was really fascinating to me, what I took away from filming that for that week was they did this experiment where, so we first got there, it was dusk. We were doing, radiation readings and K2 readings and electro, just from the new parts of the house and the new structures compared to the old structures. And everything that was old from back in the day in the 70s, we had really high EMF readings, all that kind of stuff. Needles were jumping, but the new structures did not. It was very unusual. So they conducted this interview or this experiment where in the old, so they built an addition on either side of the house and to the front of the house, but the original house is still within the new build, right? So they put this equipment that measures frequency and radioactivity and all that stuff inside the old structure of the house. And they had all the equipment to measure. And so we were going to try and communicate with whatever's there, right? And, they had the ham radio guy talking and no responses. And David Carr, he's like, hey, you know what? Let's let Katie try. And so I get on there and I'm like, hey, remember me? I'm back. All the equipment started jumping. And what was really cool about that was I repeated that 3 times. And as they're like kind of going, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happening. I just started talking to the house even without the radio, and we were getting the same results. All the equipment was jumping. And so it was as if whatever was there knew I was back there. It felt
remembered you.
It remembered me, and I just felt like, okay, I'm back, and I want answers. I kind of got in this like fighting mode kind of thing, but that I thought it was so strange that after 30 years of not hearing that, there we are, and boom, it was back, and they recorded it. That was.
I have to ask you. I mean, did they? Because obviously, the materials used in the newer sections are going to have better wire protection, better sheathing, and stuff like that. But do you feel like maybe that was a reason for the EMF readings being so different, or do you feel like it was entirely within the structure itself? That's the energy.
Question. That's a really good question, because the readings were high around like the silo, the well, the original foundations, where the barn sat, even when the structure was removed. So potentially as an investigator, maybe there is old wiring and all that kind of stuff. But when you put all the different high strangeness things that occurred, and my greatest fear, because a lot of years have passed. I'm like, we're going to get out there and nothing's going to happen. It's going to be crickets. But to get out there and have just so many different things happen that were unusual was like, okay. So, and not only on the ranch property, that's another thing. Like what I thought was isolated to just that property alone, through my research and digging old newspaper articles and conducting interviews, this phenomenon has touched several different little towns within the county of Elbert County, Colorado, and several hundred people. So although the activity was very high and strange on the ranch, and it was investigated by APRO, the phenomenon itself was this whole area, of little towns like Franktown and Elizabeth and Kiowa and all this. And just a couple weeks ago, I just did an interview with a kid that grew up on a property in Elizabeth there in Elbert County and has experienced some of the very same phenomenon still. And so the very first day of filming, we went to this little bar in Elbert, and the owners, little towns, you have these local, restaurants and bars where the locals go hang out and gather and commune in that. And so we were there, and people, of course, are curious. What are these cameras? What are you guys doing? And well, this is what, back, And, they're like, oh, well, check out what just happened like 2 months ago. And
oh, cool.
Yeah. And there's a guy, and he's like showing me pictures of his phone of like these lights coming down in the Ponderosa Pines with no helicopters, no plane, no explanation. And then he was out hunting one afternoon with his brother-in-law. It was dusk. You see the elk in the photo, and there was clearly a Sasquatch being out there, because there were Sasquatch reported out there, out. In the mid-70s, connected craft. And so this phenomenon, even though it's not to the height it was back then, it's still occurring to this day. And to me, that was my big takeaway from that whole experience, was like, wow, number one, whatever that is, that phenomenon, it seemed intelligent. Number two, it's still occurring on some level, to other people to this day. So it's fascinating.
And number three, it recognized you.
Yeah, it appeared to recognize me. And it's still,
because energy doesn't change, right? I mean,
that's true. But I wonder, like, what it is that connects to us. Like, to me, it's even though I'm not frightened like I was as a child, I'm not a little girl anymore, and I have found my power in my voice and that. So I'm not afraid. I wouldn't want to go out there at night, or
I understand that. Well, that's seriously, because if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to defend against it.
Exactly.
And you've talked to, and I've talked to, but not nearly as many, but experiencers.
Right.
I've done this show for several years, and another show I've done for right at 10. So I've talked to a lot of experiences of different paranormal and high strangeness events. But I can't even imagine the number of people that you've talked with. And I don't know if you've been experienced with or participated with the experiencer groups, but there's so many that you can't do a UFO or a MUFON conference without, they are the same a lot of times, but there are a lot of different UFO conferences, but there's a lot of experiencer interaction at those. And I'm sure that your experiences have been validated for you through those. But when you talk to other people, do you find yours is not an unusual moment? That was a long way to go to get to that question, but
something I like. Well, first of all, I'm so thankful and grateful that there's places that people can go now and communicate with other people. And that's why I was so grateful to Dr. Sprinkle, because he was the really first person to sit down and have an ear, to just sit down and understand and listen to you and not judge you or think you're crazy or anything else. Because, back when, when you're little and you're a kid and you're experiencing those things, sometimes the adults, it's too much for them to deal with too. So they're like, oh, it's all a dream or an overactive imagination or this, or, don't be afraid, you're hearing footsteps, it's creaks of the house, all those excuses you hear. And what happens?
Again, the protection. They can't protect you, so they have to make it nothing.
Right, exactly. And then what happens is you stop telling and you shut down. And, as humans, we tend to do that when you're not being heard or you're being brushed off. You're like, wait a minute. And what's interesting about that, they knew things were happening at the ranch, but I think because it was happening at my house, they weren't making the connection either.
Right.
So it's a different world we're living in now that we have podcasts and these conferences and groups where we can go and learn from each other and go, wait a minute, this is a common occurrence. And something that I've heard from other experiences are, it can start out as being a very frightful experience, and then it seems to somehow transform into more of a spiritual awakening or, that kind of thing. And you get less afraid of it. And, you find your power and it becomes something positive in your life. And it has for me to a degree, but I still, as far as going out and investigating these high strange locations, even like with Trey Hudson down south, I've been fortunate enough to join his team a couple times. You still have to, protect yourself, protect the group, and never go out in places alone. Don't do that.
If you take anything from this show, take that.
Right.
Seriously.
Don't go out by yourself. Have a plan. Yeah. Protect yourself. Go in with positive thoughts and energy. And I've come to believe that on some level, and certainly it doesn't explain all the unexplained phenomenon, but I do believe we can manifest and interact with the phenomena itself. So go in with good expectations, that kind of thing. But when it's Dr. Sprinkle, the more I got to know him, and that's where my book, Letters of Love and Light, came. I went initially to get all the information on the ranch. I started getting lost in letters that people had written to him for 40 plus some years. And Dr. Sprinkle had kept all his response letters. So I spent 3.5 years going back and forth to visit Leo and to go to the archives. And I was just taking hundreds of pictures of these letters. And I'd go home and read letters from people around the world. And I pulled out all the juicy parts of the letters, like when they were describing ETs or describing the craft or, one chapter.
Awesome to have that access.
Oh, it was such a cool thing to just see a pioneer's life of work and how he kind of handled, like the Phil Classes of the worlds and the debunkers, and to read the correspondence between those two was fascinating, and to kind of see his evolution in what he was thinking was going on. So I am so grateful that he had the mind to keep his letters as well. It's sort of like reading somebody's very personal diary through 40 years of work and research. And it was,
what a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, I'm not being facetious. That's such a blessing to be able to access that.
Yeah, and anybody can access that too. I mean, you can go down to the Heritage Center in Laramie, and anybody can go in and request to see, his boxes and pull them out. And if you're like me, you'll get lost for 3 years. But
I could see that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. He wanted to put me under hypnosis because of my experiences on the ranch. And so he did for an hour and a half. And what I was going to say is I found it interesting when I listened back. That for the first 20 minutes of that hypnosis, it was the little girl finding her voice to speak up and speak her truth to the adults. So I just found from a psychological standpoint, that kind of interest, that came through. It was like, okay, to the adults that told me not to talk about it. And I was like, standing up and saying, here's what I need to say. And it's really helped my sister as well, doing that. But I just thought that was really fascinating.
I think so too. This, when you have the opportunity not to have it handed to you, but to take back your voice and your power, or just to pick it up for the first time. I mean, that had to be as liberating as being able to even discuss it, because so many times people won't open up at all. And look at you go.
That's true. And like you were saying, Kat, too, it's having the original APRA reports and the original documents and all that. It was such great confirmation for my mom and my sister and I. The other adults, my mother is still with us. She's 91 years old, bless her heart, and she's hanging in there. But the other adults have all since passed. And the 3 boys that grew up on the ranch that lived there, they have all since moved out of the state of Colorado. I'm friends with the youngest son on Facebook. The older 2, they I have not they have not contacted me back. But they were also traumatized by what happened out there. They're just like, you know what, we have very different lives now. We don't want to open that Pandora's box and have whatever was there at the ranch connect to us again. And I don't blame them, actually, because I do believe that in some circumstances things can connect to you. I
believe you can speak them into your life again, because that energy will recognize yours, as it did when you went. But we are just about to have to go to our break. And I just have to tell you that I am so glad that you're here and that we're having this conversation, because I think this is so important for other experiencers to hear. And I think also it's important to talk about the fact that there's more than one location where this type of activity occurs. And so far, just in this conversation, we've talked about 3 of them.
Right.
So it's a big deal. It's a great, big, hairy deal. And I'm glad that you are the person that we can have this conversation. So I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to more of it when we come back at the top of the hour. So for everyone listening, we are going to take our break, and we will see you on the flip side here on Fate Mag Radio on KUNX Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to the UnX Network. KUNX-DB, Kansas City,
Ever
Missouri.
had a garden that just doesn't perform? Tired of buying expensive fertilizers all to get plant burnout? How about trying plant food instead of plant poo that is full of petroleum enhancers? Log on to GoPlantGo.com for an all-natural plant food and a wonderful soil amendment that really works. These products will bring health and longevity to your garden plants. Whoever wrote "I never promised you a rose garden" didn't have Go plant food. Yep, it works on roses too. Here's one for you. Roses are red and violets are blue. Log on to Go Plant Go and see what it can do. That's corny. Wait, it works on corn too. This food will not disappoint. Go Plant Go has been feeding big farms for over 20 years. So why not the smaller crops? Food is important. Good, natural food. So log on to GoPlantGo.com and try your very own today. Use discount code UNX at checkout and save an additional 10%, and shipping is free.
Medical Mary has the highest quality CBD products to enhance your health and wellness goals. Our cutting-edge formulas are not only made with the best ingredients, but also are curated to target specific needs for the body. Use CBD for energy, weight management, pain and stress relief, beauty, sleep quality, pets, and more. Our motto is people helping people. Start your journey into improved health and happiness with Medical Mary CBD. Available at medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. That's medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. Or visit my website, margiek.com, for a link. I use Medical Mary and I love it, and it works. I sleep better and feel better thanks to Medical Mary CBD. Visit margiek.com for more information.
I am Conor McGregor, multiple weight MMA champion. I'm a fighter and I've been through many battles in the octagon. Many consider my fights in the octagon heroic, but the real life heroes are those men and women who fight to protect us every day. The real life fighters, the real life heroes are the firefighters and police officers. These first responders are true heroes because these brave men and women put themselves in the line of danger every single day, protecting us all. The Tunnel to Towers Foundation ensures that first responders from fire, EMS and police departments who are killed in the line of duty with young children have a home without the burden of a mortgage. They are my heroes. They need our help today. I'd like to ask you to join me in donating $11 a month to support their efforts. Your $11 a month honours and supports our first responders. Please call now at 1-844-BRAVEST or visit tunneltotowers.org.
Hey folks, this is Derek Hayes, host of Monsters Among Us podcast, and I'm here to invite you to check out the program every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on the X. Each week, Monsters Among Us highlights real accounts of ghosts, aerial anomalies, strange occurrences, and cryptic creatures, straight from the mouths of the witnesses themselves. So grab a snack or a beverage, switch off the lights and lock the doors, then tune in for some paranormal terror. Catch Monsters Among Us every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern with me, Derek Hayes, right here on the unxnetwork.com.
Join us on unxnetwork.com for real alternative talk and live paranormal programming with multiple shows and top hosts including Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, Dave Schrader, Race Hobbs, Margie K, and that's just naming a few because the X covers UFOs and UAPs, extraterrestrial encounters, Bigfoot and cryptids, portals and dimensions, consciousness and conspiracies, and many other fascinating subjects. And right now, you can become an X subscriber free. Receive a free digital copy of the quarterly UNX magazine, edited by our managing editor, Lee Spiegel, and get discounts to our annual X conference and more. Join us and get real alternative talk and paranormal programming all in one place on the X. Log on to unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com.
Explaining the unexplained. The new unxnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. And I'm going to tell you, if you have not checked out the Fate well, not just Fate Magazine Radio, but the Fate Magazine website, fatemag.com, you gotta. It is so interesting. We have new editions coming out. We have electronic editions that you can get. Go check it out, because you know what? You never know what you're going to find with Fate. That's the truth. I am so excited to have Katie Paige here with me tonight. We have been having a fantastic discussion, and we have so many of the same interests, Katie. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here. And yes, we do. We could just for hours on end, I think.
I think you're right.
The wine, before we know, Friday's gone, Saturday's gone, Sunday's gone.
Well, you know, that's the best part about going to these conferences, but you are so in demand at them, and I'm so busy trying to talk to everyone, trying to get... I'm learning when I'm there. And, you know, I love it. I met so many people when we were at Contact that I had not met before. There are a lot of new, since this has gotten to be more scientific, I noticed that there's a lot more professional treatment of it. And I don't even know how many physicists and engineers and dedicated fully scientific people I met just at that one conference this year. But there were a lot of new ones to me.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I think we're always learning. And when we stop learning, and, you know, then it's time to hang up.
Then we're dead. Yes. I would like to continue learning. Thank you.
Right. And it is such a delicate balance too. And I do appreciate that about MUFON, you know, their approach that they take. But I think there's room for, you know, it's a delicate balance, right, Kat? I mean, you have to have a very open mind and be open to listening to everybody's unique experiences. And at the same time, there's so much importance in not only the history of ufology, and shout out to David Marler for all the work he's doing.
Absolutely. Brilliant, man.
Yeah, brilliant, and documents and scientific experiments, and all those researchers out there that are going out and doing that, and, you know, all the brightest minds coming together to try and figure this out, because it is such a deep rabbit hole, and we need both. We need that balance of, you know, listening to the experiencers and listening to the whistleblowers and listening to the science. All of it has to come together in a balance.
And it's really surprising, I think, how something that was so really almost taboo, if you discussed it for the longest time, you were discredited in whatever your field was. And now it's so mainstream, thanks to the whistleblowers, thanks to the people that stepped up and said, this is a scientific topic. Let's look at this. And, you know, there's a lot of people that went out on a huge limb. And, you know, one of my favorites and one of my all-time heroes will always be Stanton Friedman, because he was a physicist. He was a brilliant physicist. He was a brilliant man. He was all about science, and he was documenting these things, this history. So people like that were willing to step in. There's so many that if I tried to name them, then we would be here for days, and I wouldn't get to learn more about you.
Right. And doing the book letters of love and light, I have so much gratitude and respect for the pioneers of the field. And, you know, and speaking of Contact in the Desert, that was full circle for me to finally be able to sit down and talk with and meet finally the one and only Linda Moulton Howe, who has a female field. I have the utmost respect for her, and for, you know, the field that she's forged and the work she continues to do. And my goodness, that woman never stops working.
She does not. And, you know, 200 miles an hour all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's the one that first taught me about hybrids. When we were at an event, we were walking through together, and she stopped, and this young woman who was with her mom, and Linda just looked at her and then looked up at the mom and raised an eyebrow. And the mom was like, yeah. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful young women I've ever seen in my life. And she was a hybrid. And Linda recognized that immediately. It took me a bit, but the conversation was what clued me in.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, really? Okay. But I respect her also. But I respect you too, because you do a lot as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But to be a fly on the wall, to hear things she must hear, and and she handles it with such grace. And
she's so professional.
And so many pioneers like that. I just, with Dr. Sprinkle, because, he was diagnosed with cancer and he knew he was coming to the end. And I'm thinking to myself, as somebody who's dedicated so much time and effort into seeking answers in the field, I'm like, my goodness, you've been at this, half your life, basically. And you're towards the end of your life, Dr. Sprinkle. Do you have any regrets? Do you regret, you don't have the answers you were seeking. And he, in good old Leo Sprinkle fashion, he'd always say, yeehaw, being from Wyoming, yeehaw. And he just had this sweet smile on his face. And he's like, you know what? I have zero regrets, because it's about the people you meet along the way and the information and all that. So I always think of him, and I'm like, because like everybody, we have days where we're like, get exhausted, like, okay, we're never going to, but so much is happening. It's such an exciting time in the field right now, with all the whistleblowers coming forward, and, this timeline that we could potentially be on, for really some big news coming forward in the next few years. So I'm on pins and needles like everybody else. Like, what's the next year? What's the next 2 years, 3 years? What is it going to look like for this field, and what we're going to learn and uncover about what we truly know?
Well, and that's what's really fascinating, because I got, and you do all the time. You attend many more events than I do. But it's so fascinating to me when I get to hear someone like the Navy pilots who were actually in the air with these objects, and the people that nobody will say there was a whole flight of these.
Right.
These weren't individual craft. It was like a squadron kind of a thing, and I don't know why they don't just go ahead and say that publicly as easily as they do in other things. Do you think that's because of the fear factor, that they're afraid of our reaction, the people that would be releasing that information? Or do you think that they anticipate that we'll just all go to pieces?
I'm kind of getting less and less, less and less convinced that that's the reason they're holding this from us. I think if nothing else, in the last few years, I think we can recognize that there have been some astonishing revelations coming forward, from Congress, from whistleblowers, that should have a bigger reaction than what it's had already. I mean,
right?
And even for us, I can attend a conference and listen to a fabulous speaker that is very credible, has unbelievable, mind-blowing information. And at the end of the day, I still, I get a phone call from my mom. Hey, I need creamer for my coffee. And I just heard this most mind-blowing stuff about S4 or something, how aliens eat or whatever. And I'm like, need to go pick up my mom's coffee creamer. You still have to live your life and go about your taking care of your families and your bills. And so I think that's what it is. Like, I don't think that they're not telling us because of that. I think there's liability issues, especially with our Air Force, with these projects. And I do believe that some of the answers that I've uncovered, at least on the ranch property, there's no question at all that they were aware of the property, that they were out there on the property. One of my favorite documents I found in Dr. Sprinkle's archives was a little memo that basically read that Warren, and his last name was redacted out, from Camp Carson, was on the property. He felt something take over his mind, made him walk towards the woods, would release him. He would run back to the ranch house, and this did this to him 5 times, which kind of spoke to me of some sort of mind control or something. And something I didn't talk about for the longest time were these strange, mysterious boxes. And this was one of the things that was validating for me when I got the APRA report. There were several validations in it, but this was one of them because I experienced this strange box. When I was young, it was during the day. They had a pickup truck and some dogs, and me and the youngest son were in the back of the pickup truck. My mom's boyfriend was driving the truck, and we had stopped at this little outbuilding shed kind of thing to get something by the wood line. So where the ranch house sits is kind of, flat land, open, and then they had these big patches, or they still have these big patches of ponderosa pines out there in Elbert County. And in the back of the ranch house is this big forested area, these ponderosa pines. And there was a road that drove back in the woods, in the trees. And so we stopped at the outbuilding to get something. He must have wanted something out of that building. And the hum started up, sounded more like bees, but it was like a sound. Like if you've ever stood under like a power poles or whatever, that humming, buzzing sound. And I looked to the trees, and about 3-4 feet off the ground is this strange box. It had lights on it. It was making a noise. And the adult in the situation was yelling at us to get back in the truck, get back in the truck, get back in the truck. I looked back to where I saw the box, and it was gone. It vanished. And I had never forgotten that. I was very afraid because the adult was very afraid. The dog was going crazy. And in the APRA report talks about several encounters with this box. And then interestingly enough, with Trey Hudson down south, as on Fleur, it's not the same box, but a box nonetheless that they captured. Skinwalker Ranch had the same thing. So it really wasn't until other people had these encounters with this box that I started, okay, well, this was reported there at Elbert County as well. And a very nice woman one time came up to me and she said, did you ever stop to think that perhaps that whatever that hum or tone or frequency that was coming out of these boxes were used as some sort of like calming mechanism or hypnotic? So when the gentleman says he felt something take over his mind, made him walk towards the woods, almost like somebody being hypnotized or controlled.
Interesting.
Maybe they were using them for the cattle. Because when I was researching and interviewing people on their mutilations that were occurring back in the time, I drove to Wyoming to interview one of my witnesses, and her family experienced a lot of things, pioneered the town itself. They have roads named after their family and everything. So, generations in this area. And right out of high school, so 1978, early 79, they had purchased a property in Rama, Colorado, and which is right on the border of Elbert County, so really close to where the ranch was. And they owned several hundred acres of land. Her husband was out on horseback checking the cows for calves, came across a dead calf. It had 4 cuts in a perfect square. The top of the fur was removed, but the skin was still there. So he gets back on the horse, rides to the house, gets my witness. They drive back in the pickup truck. By the time they got back, which my witness said took them about 20-25 minutes, that calf had been completely mutilated, cauterized incision, organs removed, blood drained. The only tracks that were around that calf were the hoof marks of the horse. No sounds. They were miles off the county road. She said it's not like anybody could have just pulled over and done this in that amount of time. She said they felt watched. It felt eerie. They were terrified.
No doubt. Like cauterized.
Cauterized. Yeah, they interrupted a mutilation in progress. And something that she had told me, because they know several ranchers, for decades. And she said the ranch and the cattle where the mutilations were occurring, the cattle would all huddle together and they were really calm, as if hypnotized.
Right.
And the cattle in the adjoining pastures were freaked out and, all going nuts. And so that box, could that be something like that? And in fact, in the APRA report, it talks about that supposedly, and I didn't witness this myself, but it was reported that there were 2 types of different ET beings seen and communicated with on that property. One, there was a drawing of one in Dr. Sprinkle's archives, and it was very unusual looking, and it looks very mechanical AI type, and the other type was a very Nordic type. And I'm wondering if those boxes were connected to the more AI mechanical looking beans.
Is this the one that you were talking about with the high furrow brow and like the tubey kind of?
Tubey. I call them tubey guys now.
Because that was a fascinating drawing.
Yeah, I mean, very unusual. They have these spindly, long arms and legs, almost like ant. You know, like you hear of the ant people, sort of like that. But then it had this weird, like, shield apparatus over its chest, and this, the large eyes, bigger than our eyes, but not the wraparound eyes. Heavy brow, wrinkles around the mouth, and the fascinating thing was when we had Sean Bartok, who wrote a book called Flashbacks. Turns out his property was 14 miles away from the ranch. We didn't know of each other. I had invited him to come speak at a Colorado MUFON meeting, and he gave his presentation. I'm just sitting there watching his presentation like everybody else, and he, up on the screen, has these drawings of these beans that he saw on his property, and they're almost identical to the ones on the ranch 14 miles away.
Holy wow.
The same eye shape, the same wrinkles, the same heavy brow, even the tubies. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. We didn't know each other. It was just incredible. So I'm like, there's got to be something to that. When something like that happens, it's so validating. And
well, it is. I mean, it's synchronicity in action. And it's such an important thing and that's the value. That's the value of being willing to communicate, to interact with someone, not being afraid to just have that conversation. And that's happening left and right now.
Right. And it's so important, even when it's really high strangeness.
Yes.
If I say this, people are going to be like, oh, okay, but when you have other people experiencing the same things, just like this show I just did just recently, just a few days ago out of the UK with Charles, I'm talking about these disembodied electrical voices, which, to your average person is like, what is that? He experienced the same thing in the middle of nowhere that almost sounds identical to what I heard here in Elbert County so many years ago. And what is that? I mean, here I'm thinking, well, could that be the military creating all this? And actually just recently during that hearing, they talked about these false or fake or staged abductions and on all these. I'm like, could have that been happening out there at the time? But truly, I don't think so. Just because the phenomenon out there has been happening way before the military showed up. I truly believe, and this was a question I had for several years, was it the chicken or the egg? Who was there first? I think the phenomenon was there first. Military was aware of it, and then they came in.
Don't you think maybe that's why military is there now?
Yes, I do.
I do.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
I think they've been trying to understand the phenomenon, perhaps control it, weaponize it, use it to their advantage for different reasons. I mean, a lot of these, MK Ultra, different types of programs, these secretive programs they had and probably still have. I know they say a lot of them are ended, but I don't know if I truly believe that.
I would be shocked.
They're going to use them to our advantage. And that being said, I believe that's why we hear so much from the Navy, not so much from the Air Force. The Air Force has a lot of liability issues. If the truth were to ever be told, and they can prove it, and they can prove that they've affected and harmed other people's lives through the process of whatever they're up to, that's a liability issue.
Yes, it is. And it's significant.
Yeah, it's huge.
Go ahead. I interrupted you.
I think that's why they're remaining hush-hush.
Well, I would agree. And, I find it odd that because I feel like it's come to a point that this is global, it's spoken of, there's programs, there's reality, like real science happening programs, as well as the woo ones that are still out there. But, but the scientific community is involved now, so you cannot poo-poo science. You can't sweep science back under the rug. And that is when we started getting these reports. Because how long, and we both know people, okay, there have been fast movers, there have been unidentified, submariner experiences that have gone for decades. And, when you hear the question, is it biologic or mechanical, repeatedly, see it in transcripts, see it wherever, then this has been going on a long time. And now all of a sudden science is involved, and how are you going to hide that?
Right.
People that aren't bound by their oaths, people that don't have them are just in the science community that are, out there doing things. And I know that there's still non-disclosure issues, but it's fascinating, right? Because the whole world is opening up on that topic.
Right. And it's a crossroads, I think, because this phenomenon and I know, with Bob Bigelow, who's been trying to answer these questions for quite some time and has put in some serious money, as others have as well, into answering these. This is not a phenomenon that you can cue. Even when you're out there with film crews, with history, with, Skinwalker or beyond Skinwalker, you can't cue these things to occur when you want them to.
No matter how many rockets Travis shoots.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And even though we're gathering scientific information, and that was fascinating. They launched, the 4 rockets out there at Elbert County, and the big rocket, that final rocket, where they put all the scientific equipment into the rocket, and then we launch it, and it comes back. First of all, what was fascinating is how it launched and came to its side and then fell, and where it fell. And they don't mention this on the show, and I think this is interesting. One memory that my sister and I have, it was in the springtime, heavy snow had fallen, but it was a sunny blue day, and we were out there on the ranch flipping the Frisbee, and we looked down at our feet, and there's this perfect circle on the ground, large, and it was dry and nothing. There was no weeds or grass or anything. It was just very noticeable. And on the outside of the circle was snow, a couple inches of wet, heavy snow. And in the APRO report, it talks about the snowless circles. And I was thrilled when I read that. And they measured, it was 75 feet in diameter. And there were 2 of those on the property. I only witnessed the one. But where that big rocket that they launched landed was right there where the circle was. It was out in front of the ranch house. So I knew approximately where that circle had been. And that rocket fell there. And all the rest went miles off. And to have that one go right there was weird. But
it is weird.
That equipment reported no launch. Everything failed, just like at Skinwalker Ranch. So it's like it hit something in our atmosphere and fell over on its side and landed where that circle was. And so even though we didn't get any measurable data to compare, but what we did get, and Paul and Andy said the same thing, the same thing occurred here as with Skinwalker, which is data in of itself.
It is indeed.
That failed. The failure of the equipment is also data. So, it's really important to start gathering that. But at the same time, like I said, it's a hard phenomenon to scientifically record and measure when it's unpredictable.
Well, people have found that to be true over the last several years. And, Skinwalker Ranch has been something that I've been interested in for decades. I came across a book written by Ryan Skinner eons ago, it feels like, but it's not really that long. About 10 years, maybe a little more. And I'd always heard about it, but I'd never read any kind of documentation. I didn't know there was really. At that point, I was new to the topics. And so this book was in a used bookstore somewhere, and I grabbed it, and I was like, holy crap. Hey, this guy's trespassing like a madman all over this ranch. And then he's shocked when things are following him down the road, right? But it was just so bizarre in my head, but my subconscious is going, you know about this stuff. Find out some more. This is interesting, So that's when I started researching it, and I've reached out to Bigelow several times, and he has great gatekeepers, just so he knows that Jan is brilliant. But, it's just one of those things that you go, I really wish I knew somebody to talk to about this. So I started looking around, and it blows my mind constantly.
Right. Do you think Bob Bigelow actually has more answers than what he's sharing with people, and that's why he's remaining so quiet, or
Yep.
What do you think is going on there?
I think that, his fascination, I think, was from a science side, because the experiences that were being reported there, especially ufology type things, I think that is his color Kool-Aid. That's his fascination. Aeronautics is fun when you're a guy that likes to, have speed and power and, like Musk. I mean, people, and plus, we're talking about brilliant people who have inquisitive minds. They didn't get there because they wanted to rest on their butt and not do anything else. They're fascinated by everything. I think Bigelow became involved because A, it's fascinating, B, could you get it to where it was a repeatable process and maybe get some aerodynamic information out of this and start doing your own testing and develop something fun. And, then the high strangeness, the extraordinarily high strangeness, I think was probably off-putting more so than an adventure, because some of the stuff that happened back in the day at Skinwalker was hideously frightening. When you have closets that lock from the inside,
right,
and you have all these, there were so many different, very strange things on that property that I can't believe that family lived there as long as they did. I just really couldn't. So, it's just fascinating to me. I would love, and eventually, even if it's in the next life, I'm going to get a chance to talk to this person whose mind fascinates me and whose experiences I find brilliant as well. But we are going to have to go to our break. This will be our final break, and then we're going to go straight through. So, Katie, you'll join me back, right?
Absolutely.
All right. And guys, we'll be back after this. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey there, X-Streamers. Ray Sobbs here to tell you how you could tune in to your favorite paranormal programming without using all of your mobile data in the process. When you're on the road and you want to log into the X, save your mobile data and never miss a minute of the OnX Network programming by calling the X line at 667-930-9331. No smartphone app or internet needed. Save it to your contacts and dial hands-free. And there's no extra cost to you if you have unlimited minutes. So you can listen to the X at any time on any phone, anywhere. Check it out at 667-930-9331. That's 667-930-9331. It's brought to you by your friends at the Paranormal.radio and the UnXNetwork.com.
If you're interested in reading the facts about USOs, UNX Media has the perfect one-of-a-kind book for you. Debbie Ziegelmeyer is the director of the MUFON Underwater Research and Recovery Team, a UFO investigator, and has appeared on TV shows such as the Alaska Triangle. Debbie now shares her knowledge of USOs, underwater submerged objects, in her new book, The Alien Colonization of Earth's Waterways, a reference guide to water-related UFO sightings. Read about hundreds of USO observations worldwide, including many from our own military and Debbie's many investigations. Get your copy of The Alien Colonization of Earth's Waterways at Amazon. Visit unxmedia.com for more information. That's www.unxmedia.com.
Hey, so what's a great way to spread awareness that driving high is illegal everywhere? A catchy song, of course.
You can run, but you can't drive high. You can run, but you can't drive high.
Friendly reminder, don't drive high. If you feel different, you drive different. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
What's up, Saucerheads? This is Ryan Sprague, host of Somewhere in the Skies, where each week we bring you the latest UFO news, featuring interviews with some of today's leading UFO researchers. We also take a look back at fascinating UFO cases of the past. And we feature a series called Witness Accounts, where you tell your UFO stories. Every week is truly something different, so be sure to check us out every Wednesday at 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on the UnX Network. And remember, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop searching somewhere in the skies.
Another great book hot off the press. The 50th anniversary of the Southeast Missouri Ozarks UFO Flap is now available on Amazon. Missouri Mutual UFO State Director Debbie Ziegelmeyer and Assistant State Director Margie Kay collaborate on this unique book about the 1973 UFO flap that made worldwide news. Find out about Dr. Harley Rutledge's investigation at the site and why Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Ted Phillips, and other high-profile UFO investigators were so interested in what was going on in Piedmont, Missouri, and nearby areas. Debbie and Margie worked on this project for over 10 years to pack this book with the most relevant information for the public, and in fact, this area is still a hot spot for UFOs and sightings to this very day. Visit unxmedia.com for this book and many more publications. That's unxmedia.com.
Medical Mary has the highest quality CBD products to enhance your health and wellness goals. Our cutting-edge formulas are not only made with the best ingredients, but also are curated to target specific needs for the body. Use CBD for energy, weight management, pain and stress relief, beauty, sleep quality, pets, and more. Our motto is people helping people. Start your journey into improved health and happiness with Medical Mary CBD. Available at medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. That's medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. Or visit my website, margiek.com, for a link. I use Medical Mary and I love it, and it works. I sleep better and feel better thanks to Medical Mary CBD. Visit margiek.com for more information.
Real alternative talk. The X.
Welcome back to the final segment of Fate Mag Radio. I am so glad that you are here with my guest, Katie Paige, and we have been having the best conversation. And, we had talked about Bigelow's contest. And I'm just going to say that hundreds of essays were submitted offering evidence of the afterlife. And Bigelow had put up money, and this was considered the biggest essay contest of all time. And prizes were awarded.
Oh, they were.
Jeffrey Mishlove, who I know. It's so weird. Jeffrey Mishlove, a former Las Vegas resident, took home $500,000 for his winning essay. And the third place finisher believes the many forms of misunderstood evidence are all connected somehow. So now Bigelow said that his challenge is to find a way to take all those essays and get them into the hands of the public for greater acceptance. And this was, what's the dateline on this? There's not one. How is that possible? But 2021. So
wow, this is fascinating and good for him for doing that. I mean, because isn't that what we're all sort of seeking, answers? How to, proof of the afterlife, proof of extraterrestrial contact or spiritual beings, whatever it is. We want to know how to communicate, interact with it, converse with it, so long as it's positive. Be careful again. And that's what's scary to me sometimes, especially when you're talking about these high strangeness locations. We don't know what we're dealing with here.
We don't,
and it's my belief after over a decade of just the research on Elbert County that we're looking at where we want just simple black and white answers, or I tended to be a pretty black and white person. Give me simple, easy Occam's razors, black and white on a piece of paper, and that's the answer I want. But unfortunately, that's the truth of the matter is we're looking at a multitude of things occurring all at the same time.
Well, we are. And none of this stuff, if this was easy, it would have been resolved years ago.
Exactly.
Decades ago, century ago. But, in this particular instance, we were talking about this contest, on a very anomalous topic. It was over 1,000 people entered the Life After Death contest. And there were millions awarded. There were millions of dollars as prizes in this contest. So, nearly $2 million in prize money. So I just think that's, if I had the money, would I pay somebody for that information? I would probably go and try to gather my own experiences.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, but I'd probably take people that had neat ideas along on the trip. There's a lot of people that I trust, as far as their abilities in the paranormal and in spirit communication and stuff like that. It's fun because the paranormal research was like you. That's what I did first. But when you start seeing all this information on ufology, I'm sorry, there are going to be some people in ufology that get upset about this, but they are connected.
Oh, absolutely.
There are absolutely, there are three big things: cryptids, UFOs, spirits. Mm-hmm. I firmly believe that all of these are part of the big circle, and we just get glimpses into small slices of that, right? And so we don't really know.
Right. And it's been talked about for a long time. You bring up cryptids, and yes, there are reports of cryptids on the property. And another thing, I do a lot of my best thinking when I'm traveling on airplanes and I'm looking out the window. I'm looking down because and I'm looking down, you're flying over, different states. And I'm like, certainly if we had Sasquatch, we could certainly see him infrared. He'll, I've come to believe that whatever these cryptids are, especially on the ranch, one of my very favorite things that happened on the ranch property, and something, I don't have cable up here where I'm at now. I recently moved up to the mountains outside of Pikes Peak.
Okay.
By Woodland Park. So I'm up here in the Rocky Mountains, and so I don't have my cable up here anymore. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to catch up on the episodes, but I was in Virginia when I saw the episode, and I was lucky to see it, the Rocky Mountain one. And I was happy that one of the coolest things for me was that very first night, I was back on the ranch for the first time, and there was an unexpected like whiteout blizzard happening. So, it's dark time, pushing midnight. We're out there with our headlamps on, climbing over barbed wire. I actually fell for it. I was soaking wet. I was not prepared for this storm. I was not prepared. I was freezing cold. And we're walking, the film crew's behind me and other people on the cast are behind me. And out of nowhere, it's like, when you're walking and it's just white blanket of snow, no footprints, no tracks. Out of nowhere, these tracks appear. And they were bipedal. They were not animal tracks. They were 1 foot in the front of the other. And they went for maybe 12 feet or so, and then they disappeared. And for maybe, I don't know, another 12 feet where there's no tracks at all, maybe even a little longer, 15 feet. And then all of a sudden they reappeared and then disappeared again, as if it appeared to me like something came up from underground, went under, came up, and walked and disappeared again.
Oh my gosh.
So super, super interesting. And I'm so glad they got that on film and it made the episode, because so many things also that happened did not make the episode. And I was like, holy cow, I can't believe, I think I'm able to talk about it because they did a little special segment, and they may cover it later, but they did the biggest remote view in the history of the United States on that property with David Morehouse. And wow. The results were fascinating. Just fascinating. And so I hope they do more with that in the future. I hope that, since it was so active, that we're able to go back and do more research and more work out there, because something's definitely going on. Something's aware, something's intelligent, something's still happening. And I just think there's so much that can be learned yet, and doing it scientifically is the way to go. But like we've talked about, it's not always easy to do that and accomplish that.
Well, it's not. And quite frankly, remote viewing is an acknowledged practice, because we trained viewers, our military trained and utilized viewers. They know that's a real thing.
Right.
So that should not be something that people, blow off at all. Right. So I hope they hear that.
I mean, so many of those locations, you mentioned that. I mean, we have Bradshaw up there in Arizona, up by Sedona, and Sedona, just the area of itself is
on its own.
Its own, hotbed of activity, and Blind Frog and Skinwalker. And then with the MUFON archived Mars project that I head up a team going through and redacting all those old paper reports and getting them so we can open them up to the public. That is still a mission that is being picked up. I know people are getting frustrated. It's been several years, but it's back up, and they're working to get this accessible to the public so people can look at these older reports. But I learned of another place in Ohiopyle, Pennsylvania, that had very similar reports called the Ohiopyle Creature Case, and then of course Trey Hudson's down south, Marley Woods, places in the UK and around the world that have these locations of high strangeness. And the vast majority of them, all of them but one, that I've looked into are highly, highly magnetic areas. Many of them have these water or aquifers underneath. Elbert County does. David Pilates talked about that in his film, that UFO Connection. This kind of bells started ringing, like, oh my goodness, that's something I never looked into. Another reason, it's like we have multiple people working to figure this stuff out. And I'm like, okay, so we have high magnetism. We have two, matter of fact, where the ranch is, there's two aquifers that come together and meet. One has a higher water table, one has a lower water table. And then we have certain rocks and minerals, quartz crystals and that. And in the paranormal world, they talk about that as well. Limestone,
yes,
quartz.
They do.
And I feel like then you have the history of the location itself with, the Cheyenne, Pawnee, Ute, Cherokee, multiple tribes hunted and gathered and lived in these areas. Many battles ensued. Matter of fact, the witness I just talked to a couple weeks ago grew up on the property where the Hungate massacre occurred and has had all sorts of high strangeness there. And that was the precursor to the Sand Creek Massacre, one of the most horrific battles, it was horrible. Women and children brutally murdered and scalped and that. So you have all these violent acts occurring in this location. One thing I discovered in looking at the history of the location as well, they were 4 horse thieves that were broken out of jail, the local jail, and taken to the Ponderosa Pines back where the ranch house was, and they were hung, all 4 of them in those trees where all this high strangeness stuff happens. Shackles still on. Yeah, so you have all these different things coming together. A lot of it is horrific, and you wonder how much of that, just like with paranormal things, are retained in the magnetism, in the rocks, and the light, like a recorder.
Absolutely, it is a recorder.
Yeah, like a recorder, and it's recorded for decades, and maybe it leaks out in certain. That's another question I've always had as an investigator, and a researcher, is why do we have the hitchhiker effect or these attachments to certain people and not others, or more people can experience things more maybe easily than others? Like you hear with children, like children are pretty open to the phenomenon. And I hear, I talk to parents that don't know how to handle that. I met a wonderful family in Sedona, speaking of Sedona, who had a child that was experiencing so many things. And I was really fortunate and happy to talk to his parents about that, because it's a delicate balance when you're dealing with children that are having these experiences, because you don't want to feed them information and make them more fearful or say you have the answers to what it is, but you also don't want to shut them down, and you want them to have a good outlet to be able to talk about what's happening to them.
Well, absolutely. That is such a big deal, because how many times have we heard people say, well, this happened all my life, but no one would listen to me, or I was told not to discuss it, or I was told, that's not possible. And how much further would we be with our research if this was something that was publicly approved conversation? I mean, look at us. We're doing this 10 years ago. That wasn't really the case.
Mm-hmm.
You had other shows, but you can count them on one hand, that were like late night radio, and maybe more than 10. But prior to the advent of digital radio, it was not really spoken aloud except late night when you're driving across the desert somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, and now look at us.
Right. And it's also important to recognize, we do have, unfortunately, we have people that do like to hoax and, try to stage different events, see if they could pull the wool over your eyes, especially within, MUFON and stuff. You'll get the reports of people trying to, trick you, see if they figure this out, or, and so you do have to, be leery and use your own discretion, your own instincts, and, follow your intuitive sides, your own judgment. And I always tell people, if you want to investigate and research, get out from behind the computer, and even sometimes Zoom and phone calls do it. Just get out there and meet people face to face.
Yes.
Because then you're more readily accessible to your own instincts, in your meters, your meter.
That's a very important meter that we are all born with. So definitely.
Catch it to that important meter. And do the work, get out there and do the work. Because this isn't not an easy topic, like you had mentioned, Kat. If it was an easy thing to solve, it would have been solved decades ago. And here we are, still fighting the good fight and trying to understand it. I think that's, I think the military too, and government, and they're afraid, just as we are, of things they can't control and understand. If things are flying around in our airspace and they don't know what it is, certainly they don't want to go out and admit that to the public.
Well, no, but I was at the SCU conference last year and got to hear people that interacted with those craft. It blew my mind. It didn't blow my mind because of the abilities of the craft. I've seen some in the sky. I haven't had to try to keep up with them. Thank God. But, but these people are talking about a true national security risk, or at least a national property risk, because those things observe our craft a lot. So they're in the air when our guys are in the air. And that gives some of our pilots, a little bit of a pause, obviously, because you don't want to do something unexpected. Do they have like autopilot, as it were, so that they miss us all the time, or can they make themselves something that we can pass through? How is it that this isn't creating mayhem in the air? And that's a very valid question. When I heard that brought up, I was like, oh, well, that would be weird. But we've had experiences with a fleet on both the Atlantic and the Pacific side. The Nimitz, yes, that was big and sexy and got a lot of attention. You don't hear so much about the Roosevelt, right?
Right. Right. And we do know they can shut down and.
Oh, yeah.
In a lot of these areas, just like in Elbert County with the ranch too, we're so close to so many military bases.
Yes.
Colorado Springs, and NORAD. And then there's the question of the bangs and sounds and the hums. You think about tunneling underground, are they building tunnels? I mean, it would make sense to me that tunnels are coming out to who knows where out of NORAD, maybe through Wyoming up, to Malmstrom up in Montana, maybe even down in through to New Mexico. I know there's people that research these underground tunnels, and I think that's a viable logical kind of assumption to make, that these exist. And I know we know under NORAD, they do go underground quite a way.
Yes.
So,
well, they have to sustain.
Yeah. And talking to Richard Doty and that, telling us that, hey, these blacked out helicopters and that could have been a diversion, don't look over here, look over there, as who knows, who knows? So much going on. And, I don't have the answers that I would like to have. Slowly, I'm learning more and more from others. And, you can only do so many FOIAs. I don't know if I talked about it before, but there were those 2 interceptors that crashed out there under mysterious circumstances. Yes. That was interesting to get that back, and that the instructor misidentified a beacon of another aircraft, and never, nowhere in the reports does it ever identify that other aircraft. And then to go to David Marler's and find that's basically within a 3-month period, the Air Force admits scrambling 2 interceptors out of the NORAD up there in Canada of a unknown UAP on radar. So they admitted scrambling jets after an unidentified UAP there. But they won't admit it here in Elbert County when it's, stated in there from the undersheriff that, these 2 interceptors were in pursuit of an unidentified flying object.
Yeah.
That they caught on radar, and found out too through the undersheriff's widow and his son and through Stapleton, that they did issue a no-fly zone during the height of these mutilations. So they were watching the skies like crazy. We had, there was a $10,000 reward from the Cattlemen's Association. So they were actively pursuing the perpetrators of the mutilations and always watching the skies, actively looking, and they never caught or found anybody. So it's still a big mystery
that we're going to figure out how to solve, right?
Absolutely. I'm going to die trying.
Absolutely. Well, we are out of time. I have had so much fun with you. And I look forward to the next time I see you and we get to catch up and continue this conversation. We can do it here too later. But
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I look forward to being able to share what we discover as we continue to research out there.
Me too. And for everyone listening, thank you so much. You're the reason that we do these shows. I think they're so much fun. And coming up right behind us, y'all stay tuned for the Cryptic Creatures podcast with Brian and Todd. Now take care, be blessed, and we will see you the same cat time, same cat channel.